Well, good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, well, I am pleased to announce that we have Mr. Zach Henneman, PhD, with BASF with us. So thank you, Zach, for your time.
Thanks for having me.
But
Pleasure.
before we start, I would like to give you a congratulations. A congratulations is in order. You are the the newly elected president
Yep.
of the North American IPMI chapter.
Correct.
Congratulations.
So congratulations for that.
Exciting.
Thank you.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
They install you on tomorrow night?
Technically, well, yeah.
It's like a handoff formal
the
thing.
the real the board meeting we just had where
We
we
just
do
had
our
it.
officers' elections is kind of the official handoff. But yeah, I'll be going to give an address on Tuesday night at the reception. So
Oh, that's great.
yep.
We're going to miss it.
That's awesome.
We won't be
Oh.
here Tuesday. We got a really impacted schedule.
Yeah.
But best wishes for your
Appreciate it.
tenure. This
Thank you.
should be really exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
We've had some pretty interesting conversations today.
Yeah. Some really good ones.
All over the place on topics. And but the number one topic that I'm trying to weave in to these conversations is the IPMI. What is the organization? What does it mean to you? How is it beneficial to somebody out there might be thinking about joining? And I thought, who better to represent IPMI?
I started this. Well, if you look at this meeting here, the international meeting here in June, my first IPMI was exactly 10 years ago. It was 2012, Las Vegas. I went to my first IPMI meeting, gave a discussion on fire assay, and then from there, I was lucky enough to have leadership that encouraged me to keep going. Dr. Bob Ianello, Katie Hennigan Perry, who I worked for as well, Dr. Perry, just said, get into it. This is a great forum. Get into it, contribute, get to know people. It's a great networking event. Just dig into the industry. And it's been 10 years, and I've run the gamut of various different things, from speaking to co-chair and technical chair of conferences, and then board of directors, Nexco, and the officers chain, and now president. So
Good stuff. I think the networking aspect is hugely beneficial.
absolutely.
And then there's such, like I used the term in our last conversation, there's a brain trust with all the member companies here and the sharing of knowledge, maybe not trade secrets necessarily, but fire assay. Warms the cockles of my heart. I got my teeth cut on fire assay early. I remember running into Zach at a symposium in, where were we? Colorado School of Mines.
Yep, from Colorado.
Yep, we were there and having lunch, and I passed by, we were sitting at a table, a long table with a bunch of people, and I looked down at the table and I said, "Hey, Zach, you ever read Bugby?"
Said, yeah.
And he looked back at me and he goes, "I keep it on my dresser at night."
It's under my pillow right now in the hotel room.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, enlighten the viewers. What is Bugby?
Bugby, well, better from you.
For fire assayers, it's kind of like the Old Testament.
It's the Old Testament of fire assay.
Even though the Old Testament actually has references, the actual Old Testament has references to fire assay.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So it's been around for a few thousand years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's somewhere around, from what I've read, it's somewhere around 3500 AD
Wow.
is the first references to it. And it honestly, it baffles me as to how we think of our modern technology and our capabilities now, but to figure that out 3500 BC without computers, without all this
That's
amazing
over
things we have
5,000 years
now.
ago.
Yeah.
I find it just intriguing to sit down and think, how did they figure it out? And somebody had to have been sitting next to a campfire with some ore sitting next to them, and they said, "Well, that's weird. That just turned into liquid."
Right.
And
How else would have they have known?
I don't know. Other than could have been the aliens. I don't know.
That was the miners.
He got quiet.
The miners,
What?
they discovered that you could alloy gold and silver with mercury, liquid silver they called it, right? and then they had to, they could extract it from the ore, and then how do they do the next extraction technique? Well, I know that the miner 49ers used to put them in potatoes, put them in the campfire, and let the mercury go into the potato at temperature. It's like a fire assay technique.
Yeah.
It's a fire. It's
Oh, yeah.
it's cupellation almost
Right.
in a
Yeah,
potato.
by potato. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Funny.
And my son and I were watching a program on the Discovery Channel, and they were doing some gold mining down in South America, and they were still taking some of the raw ore and putting it over a campfire with mercury and literally massaging the gold out of the ore with the mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I was telling my son, I'm like, that's explaining to my son this,
Yep.
and he said, he's 11. He's like, isn't mercury poison?
Yeah.
And I said, it's not great for you. No,
No, and they're not wearing gloves, right?
not wearing gloves.
Oh, what
What
It's
about the fumes, Dad?
the
What
fumes
about
are coming
fumes?
off. And
Right?
yeah, it's unfortunate because a lot of the artisanal miners, because of their, the where they're at, their
In the-
lifestyle, they have to do this.
And in the
unfortunately.
economy
And
where they're at.
they know
Right.
it's going to impact them, but they need to do it for their own
Family,
situation. But
That's
it's still practiced very similarly.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were at the Reno conference a year ago. What do you see different as far as attendance this year?
I mean, a year ago we had just a little over 200 as we were coming out of COVID, really.
Yeah.
And then this year, I think the estimate was 475. We've effectively doubled. We've kind of taken a great step back toward where the conferences used to be, which were 400 to 600 people. So it's great to see everybody again. It's also great to see a bunch of new faces. There's another generation I see coming in that this is their first meeting.
I agree.
So I was just telling somebody from Materia on that. It's his first meeting, and I said, 10 years ago, this meeting was my first meeting. It was great to see that
Yeah.
new
like
influx of
Full
people.
circle.
Garrett was mentioning to me today that the last conference that he had attended was much fewer. And I said, well, that was the winter
Yeah.
conference. And this is the full conference
Yeah.
during the summer.
Right.
So you're going to have everybody
More
who's coming.
Right.
More of the international travelers will come to this than they will the winter conference.
Generally, yeah. And Orlando's a great destination because it is so accessible, not only for Europe and Asia. Reno was good, but it is a little more challenging to access. So we didn't get as much generation there. And two, we were still kind of in the COVID travel restriction aspect that made it a little more difficult. But I was quite happy over the last 2 years. We were able to really bridge that pandemic issue, and even that the year past, to have a digital conference that it was fairly well attended. So we've essentially, thank God, all made it through that and successfully kind of come back to closer to original attendance. So
That's great.
It's quite pleasing to see.
So I know that you are PhD chemist.
Yep.
How did you find yourself in the precious metals industry? I like to ask that question.
That's a great question. I'd like to learn that from you as well.
I've always known I wanted to be a scientist. My parents just brought down a box of, my mother was cleaning out my old closet, I guess. In the back of the closet was some of my school yearbooks, and we were flipping through them and laughing, about. I used to have hair. We had this little kindergarten yearbook, and it asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said either a scientist or a doctor. And at that time, it was a medical doctor. And I said, well, I kind of made both of those.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I said, I don't know about the growing up part, but I've made the scientist doctor thing, and I've always known I've wanted to be in science, so I've always concentrated toward that through schooling and up through when I went to undergraduate. And in I think it was my junior year, sophomore year actually, one of the guys in my class I knew was working in industry, and at the time I was just kind of working a summer job. And he happened to be a lab supervisor at Sabin Metals. I grew up in Rochester, New York, near their Scottsville plant. And he said, I got a lab tech position open. Why don't you come apply for it? And I did. I got a job there, and I worked there for those next 2 years, plus the summer before I went off to grad school.
So that's, you're immersed
How I
in
got in.
precious metals.
Cut your teeth
Yeah.
that way.
It's all
Yep.
fire assay?
I started off first 2 weeks. I washed a lot of labware.
A lot of beakers. A lot of beakers got broken.
Oh, yeah.
Until I displayed I could be trusted with chemicals too.
Right.
And then I actually worked with Algis Naokis and a couple
Okay.
other people, and
Good guy.
worked with them for that period all through school. And then as I got to the end, Steve Cook, who was their lab director at the time, he asked me, he said, "What do you're going to graduate, with your bachelor's. What do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "You ask an awful lot of questions. You should maybe think about grad school." And I said, "Well, I hadn't really thought of that." So I applied to University of Buffalo, got accepted, and he said, "Give it a whirl." He said, "If you don't like it, you can always come back here." And I went, and I still kept in contact with them all those years. Did my PhD in crystal growth, thermodynamics of crystal growth, not at all precious metals.
Right.
And then did a postdoc, and then BASF happened to call and say, "We have an opening. We saw on your resume the words fire assay and
Highly
PhD."
specialized,
Oh,
isn't it?
yeah.
And they said, "We're
Yeah,
interested."
the
And I-
PhD is what got him right there.
yeah. Well, they were looking for somebody to come in and take over a role and apprentice with a principal scientist who would retire in a few years, Jim Reganey, who was a great mentor to me. And when he retired, I took over the wet chemistry side of the lab. And then eventually, when Katie had moved on to a research position in Island, I took over the whole lab, and been there now, it's going on 13 years.
That's a long time.
That is.
Yeah. So just on that off chance of a potential summer job in fire assay, I wouldn't be sitting here today
So
if I hadn't.
after 13 years, do you still find it challenging and growth, in your question area of your mind as you're...
I always find there's always something to learn is how I view it. Even just Friday before I left, we'd gotten some odd materials. I was in the fire assay room trying to do a fusion and extraction of the material, and it wasn't going the way I wanted it to. But sitting down and saying, what are the fundamental components here that I think are causing problems, and trying to come up with a strategy to work around it, and it worked out just fine.
Come up with the flux formula that works for that material?
Yep. Yep. Had a bunch of iron and chrome in it that I didn't anticipate.
chrome.
That get a nice black viscous flux, and
Yeah.
have to add some fluorite and thin it out and do some other things. But I love the challenge. It's just it's fun to me.
It's so interesting.
yeah.
I love
isn't
it.
So what do you think about this? I was looking at the fact that we have, as an organization at IPMI, all of these member companies that are involved in the primary mining and then also the secondary recycling of precious metals. And in between, you've got manufacturers of product, consumers of those manufactured products. It's kind of mind-boggling to me as an organization to see such a wide variety of disciplines
Yeah.
that are represented within an organization of member companies. I mean, most of the time when you look at a organization, everybody's doing the same thing in that industry group. So we really have a unique opportunity as members to meet people of different disciplines and understand what they do, and we share that brain trust, and we learn from each other and network. I just think it's exciting.
That's to me some of the most cathartic part about this is that, and I think there was a number of years ago, Fred Sada summed it up, and he stood up at a dinner and said he was kind of addressing the new people he had met, and he said there's a great wealth of new influx of new people into this industry. He said, I just want you all to know that at some point 75% of us all worked for a single company, and we've come out of that and we've created new companies, but we've all still had that fraternal mindset of we're in the precious metals industry.
Was that Charlie's company?
Yeah. Yes, he said we're all 75% of us all worked at Engelhard at one point.
Charlie Engelhard.
So he raised a toast to Charlie, and he said, this is a great industry. You're getting into a great organization, and that kind of fraternal order of we can all do so much more together than we can trying to do things apart, is what I find unique and really drives this
He's so
organization.
right about that. When I think about just myself, my mentor came out of Anglo in South Africa. His mentor was at Baker Platinum in New Jersey, which is now was
It was one of the first companies Engelhard
one of the
purchased.
first companies that Engelhard purchased. And how he got the job with Anglo was Charlie Engelhard recommended him to Oppenheimer. And it's such an interesting industry that so many of us, older guys, right, have been associated with Engelhard,
Right.
which BASF owns all of it today,
I think so.
right? So it's just, to me, it's fascinating to see that.
Yeah, it's because we've still got some of those old Baker Platinum coins and a bunch of, we got Charlie's golden nugget he used to keep in his pocket and all this other stuff in our vaulting. We've got a nice display case with it, and the history of it. And I try to tell some of our new chemists that come in, I said, it's challenging because all day long they typically will see gray, brown, black. It's a powder in most cases if it's not hard metal, and they get a little bit maybe disconnected with the fact of what they're working with. They do a great job with it, but they don't necessarily think, okay, this is an automotive catalyst that attaches to our recycling side, but that metal is going to get recycled and come back full loop into brand new catalysts. Right. And you're part of this lineage in our lab specifically. We date back to the very first beginnings of that. That's over 100 plus years of precious metals experience.
That's right.
And I've got one or two guys that still work for us that are 40, 50 years. In fact,
with the company.
Yeah, with the company.
That's incredible.
And
Well, it's
that's
highly
great knowledge to hand
specialized
down.
information and knowledge. It's just, where do you get it?
Right.
And that's why we as an organization, as IPMI, we really have a unique membership.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at other trade organizations that are out there, because of the highly specialized nature, and it goes into all fields. It could be aerospace, it could be medical. Right?
Oh, yeah.
All these applications for precious metal products.
Yep.
So I was going to ask another question. Are you having any issues on the recycling side with some of the newer substrate materials that are produced? Or have they really entered into the, on the AutoCAD side, have they entered into the supply stream?
Substrates as
So like aluminum titanate type materials,
those
not really smelter.
Those materials always are challenging because of their chemical and physical properties. I mean, high melting points. They don't. But that's the great thing is just like when I told you, like Friday, I was having issues with a single fire assay.
Yeah.
Smelting is just a fire assay in a bigger cup.
Right.
Much bigger.
A much bigger cup, yeah. And it presents a challenge to sit down and look at it and say, okay, how can we take what we have and come up with a solution for it? And I think we're rather successful in doing that. But I think a lot of it just goes back to fundamental chemistry. Is I think when silicon carbides and things like that first started coming out on the what we would call the fresh catalyst side, the newly manufactured catalyst side, they never considered, in some regards, the recycling end of it 10, 12 years later. Because I've heard at some of these meetings, guys go, who came up with this stuff? And a lot of the manufacturers in the room go, we did. They said, didn't you think about this
We
when
did,
the
but
recycling?
that division's not in this meeting.
I said,
Right.
we didn't really consider the recycling end of it a decade later when it would come back to us and we'd feed it into a smelter and it would cause differences in chemistries.
Exactly.
But we find there's always a way to address it. You just have to understand the fundamentals of what it does to your process.
I was always taught if we could get it to work in the lab, it'll work in the plant. So we got to do it in the lab first. Everything goes in the lab first before we take it out there.
Right. That's your R&D right
Sounds
there.
about right, doesn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, it's amazing to me that they didn't necessarily consider that at the beginning. And they full well knew the material properties of that when they created it. But to bring it back 10 years later and try to smelt it presented some very big challenges. I think we're still dealing with those challenges. I think there's other technologies everybody's tried to look at. Could we get the metals off without having to smelt it? How could we do it? And it's leading to some creative thoughts and creative processes.
Yeah, wet chemistry is problematic, but there's also newer wet chemistry technologies that are quite promising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and that's to me the part about this, that although we're talking about techniques and sometimes chemistries that existed, the origin almost 5,000 years ago, we're still being very innovative on how to address those. And I'm glad for that. I'm glad we're not at a point where we say, well, we can't do anything else. Because to me, that's the end. And we've got to have that as new students and the new mindsets and different trains of thought.
That's why I asked that question. Are you still being
Yeah.
challenged in your thought process?
When I'm not challenged is when I'll know it's time to hang up my hat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's
good.
exciting to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Things are constantly evolving and changing.
Yep. Yeah, that I think that's the spark that I see in a lot of people in this industry, is that when it's not challenging, that's when we know it's done. Because there are so many challenges, and there's so many great products I think there's still to invent with precious metals. So
Especially on the platinum group metal side with the mechanical and the physical properties that translate into so many different industries as far as catalysts are concerned, or even corrosion resistance for dental and medical purposes. It's just if your mind can really bring it there,
Right.
you just have to think about it.
yep.
Yeah. The problem is we don't mine much of it here in the United States, so the recycling side of it is so important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we effectively call it urban mining now. I mean, it's very much urban mining.
Right.
That's a phrase we use.
I've been an urban miner my whole
above
career.
ground miners. I mean, that's what we
above-ground
do.
mining.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
there's so many different precious metals most people don't realize. I mean, you've got multiple cell phones, you've got all this electronics equipment, all got precious metals in it. And it kills me when I see somebody just go, throw away a TV remote. It's like, oh, it's busted. It's like, no, I could get the gold out of
Open it
that.
up and look at the gold. Every
Gold out
single
of that.
contact point's got gold on it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever see that video of the guys that go out on the LA freeway and sweep up the dust and do fire assay?
I've heard of that video.
It's really neat. If they end up with this little tiny bead of platinum, but it's out there.
It's out there.
That's
From
pretty
all the
interesting.
converters that are
Coming
just
off the converters as
blowing
they
out the
age.
tailpipe. Yeah,
So
as
I
they
could
age.
I could get a job and make money recycling platinum.
Yeah, you could try. Yeah,
could try.
I don't know about the road dust is the way to go, unless you go to like the Lincoln Tunnel where it's concentrated. But yeah,
That's good.
That's funny.
Well, Zach, thank you for your time today. We really
Yeah, it was a
appreciate
pleasure.
you making it. I
Yes,
know
thank
you're
you.
busy this weekend, especially.
all busy, but yeah, it's nice to sit down and certainly it's a great. I've had a lot of great fun talking to you about all this stuff over the years, and it's certainly nice to continue it and hopefully more in the future. So.
Well, we're going to do it again.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Isn't that right, Rich?
absolutely.
We'll do it again.
Yes.
All right. Thank
Great.
you, Zach.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Zach.
Appreciate it.